In this week's parsha, we have a very perplexing section which deals with the Bein Sorer Umora, the rebellious son. And the halachas are as follows. You have a young man who stole from his parents in order to eat meat and wine in a gluttonous manner. So the first time that he does it, he's brought to Beis Din and he's given malchus, he's given lashes as a warning. The second time he does it, his parents bring him to Beis Din and he's executed. He's given skila. Seems a little drastic. So the Mishnah says, Masechah Sanhedrin, on Ayin Aleph Amud Beis, that Ben Sorer Umora Nidin al Shem Sofo. He is punished for what is going to happen if he continues down the slippery slope. Yom Zakev or Yom Chayev. Better he should die innocent than die guilty. So the Gemara brings a brayso which explains, Tanya, Rabbi Yosef Gili Omer, V'chi mipnei she'achal zeh tartemer basar v'shasa chatzeh lu yayin ho'etalki omer Torah yetze Beis Din lisakem. Because he ate a tartemer of meat and the half a lug of wine, should he be executed? So the Torah understood what's going to follow. Soif megamer nichsei aviv. Ultimately, he'll exhaust his father's resources after he steals whatever his father has. Maxes out on the credit cards. So his father's funds will be depleted. And he'll seek his habit, and he won't find it. And therefore, out of desperation, will go to the crossroads, and he'll be abandoned. He'll kill people for money. So the Torah says, better we should die innocent than die guilty. The death of the wicked is good for them, and it's good for the world. It's good for them because they're spared from worse averos that would even more seriously jeopardize their share of the haba. And it's also good for the world because the people at large are spared from the harm that these Rishoyim would cause. So likewise, if we're scared that the Ben Sorer Umora will become abandoned at the crossroads, so executing him at this point is both good for him and also good for his potential victims. So this is what the Mishnah says. The Ben Sorer Umora is Nidin al Shem Sofo. Of course, there are two very famous kashas here that the Mizrahi asks in Chumash. Number one is that the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu always judges a person according to his deeds at that moment. We learn from Yishmael that when Yishmael was dying of thirst, it says, "Vayishmael Elokim es kol hanar b'asher hu sham." God heard the cries of the child where the child was, which is obvious. What's the point of b'asher hu sham? To tell me that the HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't take into account future considerations. So we see over there's no concept of al shem self, or a person is judged according to the deeds of the here and now. So why is the Ben Sorer Umora different? Famous kasha that Mizrahi asks, all the Mefarshim attempt to give Tirutzim. Another interesting question Mizrahi asks is that what is the punishment of a bandit who kills somebody? Or what is the means of execution of a murderer? So the halacha is sayef, he's killed by the sword, which is the most lenient of the Arba Misas Beis Din. So if we execute the Ben Sorer Umora, because al Shem Sofo, what he'll eventually do, why should we give him skila, which is the most chamor, the most severe of the Arba Misas Beis Din? We don't suspect that he'll commit a crime for which he's chayav skila. If we suspect that he'll ultimately commit murder, so we should give him the punishment that we give murderers. Not we should give him the punishment that we give people who do even worse averos. So the Mizrahi gives a very surprising teretz. He says that we're scared that he'll commit a murder on Shabbos in a way which is an act of chilul Shabbos, and Mechal Shabbos is chayav skila. So in that, the Maral Mugurai asks a very simple question. Who says? Who says he'll do it on Shabbos? Okay, we understand that if he's desperate, he might resort to theft and murder. But who says he'll do it on Shabbos? Maybe he'll do it on Friday, maybe on Sunday. So why should we assume that he's going to be Mechal Shabbos, so we should give him skila? These are interesting questions. But this much the Mishnah says. The Mishnah says that the Ben Sayer Rumayr is Nidin Hashem himself. He's judged because of his end. Now it seems that this concept of Nidin Hashem himself is not 100% clear as to what it means. See, the Mishnah says in Sanhedrin, the beginning of the 8th parak, Samach Chesed Beis, it says that a Ben Sayer Rumayr has to be bar mitzvah. He can only be a Ben Sayer Rumayr if he commits his crimes after turning bar mitzvah. After Mishiyavi Shtei Cyrus, after he's produced the physical signs of maturity. So the Mishnah says why? Cotton potter shloba l'chlal mitzvahs. Because a cotton, under bar mitzvah, a person isn't obligated in mitzvahs, he can't be held liable. Such the Mishnah comes the Gemara and says, cotton menolim the potter. How do we know that a cotton is potter? From where in the Torah do we know that a cotton is potter? So Gemara says, what do you mean where we know? The Mishnah says the reason a cotton is potter is because he's not bal l'chlal mitzvahs, he's not obligated in mitzvahs. So the Gemara explains its question. Anan hafli karban, this is what we mean to say. It says, is a Ben Sayer Rumayr killed for his sin? A Ben Sayer Rumayr is killed al shem sofo, he's killed for what he'll eventually do. So why not a cotton as well? In other words, the Gemara thought that if the liability of the Ben Sayer Rumayr is because we anticipate what he'll do in the future, then why should it be specifically a gadol, even a cotton? If we foresee that this cotton is going to do averos in the future, we should execute him now. Yomu zakai vel yomu chayav. Let him die innocent, not die guilty. Let him not live long enough to do those averos after his bar mitzvah. So the Gemara brings a pasuk. It says in the pasuk, Ki leish bein, and Rashi says that means as if it said Ki bein leish. When the child will be a man, then he's liable. That's Ki leish bein, as if it says Ki bein leish. When the child will become a man, then he's liable. So it's a gzeras hakasuv. It's a decree of the Torah that a cotton isn't liable for Ben Sayer Rumayr. But going back to the Mishnah, okay, we learn it from a pasuk, but the Mishnah still says the reason that the cotton is potter is because he's not bal l'chlal mitzvahs, he's not obligated to mitzvahs, which means, you're right, I wouldn't have known it logically. I could have said that Ben Sayer Rumayr is an exception, because since the whole punishment is al shem sofo, it could even be a cotton. But once I have a pasuk which tells me that it's only a gadol, not a cotton, we understand that the reason is because the cotton is not mechuyev in mitzvahs. So it seems that the Gemara is grappling with a very, very subtle issue. That in the Havamim of the Gemara thought that if the chiyuv of Ben Sayer Rumayr is al shem sofo, if he's being judged for the future, that svara would be applicable even to a cotton. After we have the pasuk, we understand that no, that even though it's true that a Ben Sayer Rumayr is nidin al shem sofo, but he'd have to be a gadol. We couldn't apply a punishment to a cotton. And the question is that l'chara, the havamina, makes sense. In other words, if we're not really punishing him for what he did, we're punishing him to save him from himself. Why should it have to be that he's a gadol? Why must it be a baroishim? Why isn't the havamina of the Gemara correct? That even if he's a cotton, we should want to save him from himself. And what is the Gemara answering? What is the chiddush of the Gemara? That once I have the pasuk, I understand that even the Ben Sayer Rumayr is nidin al shem sofo is only if he's a gadol who is liable for punishment. Furthermore, the Gemara in Sanhedrin asks a question, that where is the Azhara? Where does the Torah tell us that you're not allowed to be a Ben Seir Umayr? Now we have a cloud, we have a rule that Lo Yonash Elimkin Hizir. The Torah never just tells us if you do such and such, you get a punishment. You'll always have two psukim. You have a pasuk which tells me the Azhara, don't do X, and the pasuk of Oynesh, which if you do X, then you're liable to the punishment. But you never have one without the other. You have to have an Azhara, a warning, and an Oynesh. So the Gemara asks the question, where is the Azhara for Ben Seir Umayr? Where does the Torah tell me don't be a Ben Seir Umayr? Don't commit those crimes. So the Gemara says in Sanhedrin, it's a pasuk back in Parshas Kedoshim. That's why it's interesting. If you're interested, perhaps over Shabbos, of learning what the Minchas Chinuch, what the Sefer Chinuch has to say about Ben Seir Umayr, and you look in this week's parsha, you'll be very frustrated because it's really back in Parshas Kedoshim. That's where the Azhara is. It says, Lo sochlu al adam. Don't eat on the blood, which Chazal take to mean, don't eat in a manner that could lead to bloodshed. Meaning the bloodshed of the Ben Seir Umayr. In other words, if he steals from his parents and eats the meat, drinks the wine, in the manner which the halacha prescribes, his blood will be shed. So that's the prohibition of Lo sochlu al adam. Don't eat in a manner that could result in your own blood being shed. So the Azhara is from that pasuk. So the question is that the whole klal of Le'onash Elimkin Hizir, you have to have a warning and the verse of punishment. L'chara only makes sense where you're being punished for your crime. So it has to be, the Torah tells me don't do it. But if the whole punishment of the Ben Seir Umayr is al Shem Sof, he's not being punished for what he did. He's being punished for what he's going to do. We're really saving him from himself. Why does there have to be an Azhara? Why does there have to be a warning? Why does there have to tell me that don't do X and he did X, so he's liable for a punishment? He's not being punished for what he did. He's being saved from what he will do. So why does the Gemara bother looking for a Azhara? Now the truth is that if you read the Ramban in this week's Parsha, this issue that we're grappling with seems to be a contradiction in the Ramban himself, mamish teich kedei dibur, from one line to the next, seems to contradict himself. The Ramban writes like this. It says, Al das Rabbi Seinu, according to Chazal, ain't no cotton. The Ben Seir Umayr is not a cotton. Sha cotton potter mikol einshim shebetoyim. Because a cotton is exempt from all punishments. Mikol mitzvahs. So when we're talking about a Ben Seir Umayr, we're talking about a person who has already produced 2 hairs, meaning physical signs of maturity, is already bar mitzvah. Okay, that we've pointed out. He's liable on 2 counts, the Ben Seir Umayr. He belittles his father and mother and rebels against them. That's one sin. It's clear from the parsha that we're not talking about an orphan. We're not talking about a person whose parents are liberal. We're talking about parents who try to raise their child to do the right thing. They warn him, don't do this, don't eat that way, don't steal, etc. And he didn't listen. Doesn't listen to his parents. So committing these crimes, eating this way, stealing from the parents, eating the meat and drinking the wine in this gluttonous manner, so he is makla, he's belittling his parents. So that's a terrible aveira, belittle your parents. The Torah says you have to honor your parents, you have to revere your parents. A person is makla, a person who belittles them, the Torah says is over. Over, makla avimo, cursed is the person who belittles his parents. That's one aveira. Vasheni, in the second aveira, shuzayle al b'sayvei. He is a glutton and a drunkard. And thus he violates this which the Torah says that we have to be holy. If you remember, the Ramban, famous Ramban, back in Parshas Kedoshim, says that the mitzvah of Kedoshim to you tells us that you shouldn't be a novel b'rshus HaTorah. You shouldn't be a vile person with the Torah's permission. It's not enough to eat kosher. But even kosher food has to be eaten in a proper way. As forgive me for putting it this way, but as one person once put it, Jews don't eat pig, and Jews don't eat like pigs. It's two things. In other words, we have to eat kosher, you can't eat chazir, and you can't eat like a chazir. Right? That's kedoshim to you. So this person who's a zayil of a they violates that. So he's liable on two counts. And furthermore it says, Va'oso salvodu vosid bokun, there's a general mitzvah to serve with the Ribono Shel Olam and to cleave to the Ribono Shel Olam. Shnetztavinu l'das Hashem b'chol d'racheinu. We're obligated to know God in all our ways. A Jew has to live his life in a manner which is exemplary of Yedias Hashem. V'zaylo v'sayvei lo yada derech Hashem. And a person who's a glutton and a drunkard does not know the way of God. So therefore the Ramban tells us exactly what is wrong with the Ben Sarah Rumayra. And then he writes, V'ala klal, but in a general sense, ein bo atachet mavis. He really isn't liable for the death penalty. Vel shem sofa nidain. He's really being judged for what he's going to eventually do. K'mo sheskiri Rabbi Seidim, as Chazal say. So Ramban himself is a fellow. That he himself invokes the statement of Chazal of Nidin al Shem Sofo, and yet, before he mentions the Chazal, he feels obligated to explain to me exactly why the Ben Sarah Rumayra is liable, what he did wrong. And why do you have to explain what he did wrong? If really you're punishing him to save him for what he's going to do after he descends further down the slippery slope, so you could say what he did now was totally innocent, but we see it's going to lead to something negative, so we have to nip it in the bud. So the Ramban himself really is dealing with this issue that we can't understand. Now, I just want to point out that there's a very interesting halacha of Ben Sarah Rumayra, which is really only understood in light of this Ramban. You think about it for a second. If we think of Ben Sarah Rumayra, if the avwa of the Ben Sarah Rumayra is gluttony and being a drunk, what is the issue of the parents' involvement here? So why does the Torah put it in this way? That he has parents, the parents bring him to Beis Din. And what if he Taka was an orphan? And it came to the attention of the Beis Din that he steals and he eats and he drinks, and the halacha wouldn't apply? Apparently not. It's clear from the Torah that the halacha of Ben Sarah Rumayra only applies where the person's parents bring him to Beis Din. And the Mishnah says even more than that. The Mishnah says, an Ayin Aleph from an Aleph, Haya Aviv Rotza, V'imo Eina Rotza. Let's say the father wanted to bring him to Beis Din, and the mother not. Aviv Eina Rotza, V'imo Rotza. The father didn't want, and the mother wants. Eino Nasa Ben Sarah Rumayra Shushnei Amrayz. He doesn't become Ben Sarah Rumayra unless both parents want. Both parents have to acquiesce that he be brought to Beis Din to be executed. And that, of course, is derived from the pasuk the Sifri says, because it says in the pasuk, "V'sof suba other v'imel," the father and mother should take hold of him and bring him to the Beis Din. So the implication is both have to agree. If only the father wants, only the mother wants, it wouldn't be a Ben Sarah Rumayra. It has to be both the father and the mother want.
Both times?
Both times. Pashtus. Now there's another Gemara, and Daf Peches in Sanhedrin, which says a very interesting thing. It says there that Rabbi Yeshia said, Shleisha Devarim Safli Zeira Me'anshe Yerushalayim. 3 things I was told by Zeira from the Anshe Yerushalayim. And one of the 3 was that Ben Sarah Rumayra Sheratzu Ava V'imo Limchalo, that if the Ben Sarah, if the parents want to forgive him, Meichel, he's forgiven. Now the Yerushalmi asks a question. The Yerushalmi brings this edus, this testimony of Zeira, that the parents could be Meichel, and the Yerushalmi asks, what do we see from this more than we saw from the Mishnah? The Mishnah already said the father and mother have to agree. It's a Mishnah, right? If the father wanted and the mother didn't want, vice versa, he's not a Ben Sarah Rumayra. The father and mother have to both agree. So what's the chiddush of Zeira that the parents could be Meichel? So the Yerushalmi answers that Zeira is saying a gewaldige chiddush, because from the Mishnah I only would have thought that the parents could forgive him before they bring him to Bezdin. But if they already brought him to Bezdin, maybe it's too late. Maybe now they can't be Meichel. Comes Ze'ira, and Ze'ira is Mechadesh, that even if the parents already brought him to Bezdin, they can change their mind and be Meichel. The Yerushalmi says that's only before the Gemar Din, only before the verdict is sealed. Once the Bezdin delivers the verdict, then it's too late, then the parents can't be Meichel. But even if the parents brought him to Bezdin, if the Bezdin is still deliberating, if the case is still proceeding, that's the Chiddush of Ze'ira, that even then the parents can be Meichel. That I wouldn't know from V'safsa. V'safsa means the parents bring him to Bezdin, so of course that I understand. If only one parent wants to bring him to Bezdin, the other parent doesn't want, the parsha doesn't get off the ground. But if they both brought him to Bezdin, and now he's on trial, that's the Chiddush of Ze'ira, that even then the parents could be Meichel. Now the question is, why is that? Well, why do parents have the power to be Meichel? Well, the answer is very simple. As Ramban says, because the Avil of Ben Seru Umayra is not only the fact that he's a glutton and a drunkard. The Avil of the Ben Seru Umayra is that he rebels against his parents. So therefore the parents have the power to be Meichel. So now we understand the basis of the halacha. But it's still not so simple. Because if the Ben Seru Umayra is really needing al Shem Sofo, he's not being punished for what he did. He's being punished for what he might do in the future. So if we kill him either to save him or to save his potential victims, so why should the parents have the prerogative to be Meichel? It's not that he's being punished for an offense that he committed against them so they can forgive. Right? He's being punished, he's being executed for what he's going to do or to save him from harm that he's going to cause others. So who makes the parents violent, so to speak? What gives them the authority to forgive and forget? To forgo. Their forgiveness is really causing harm to the child, and that's really causing harm to his future victims. So again, it really comes to the same point. How do we understand really what is going on over here? Is the Ben Seru Umayra being punished for what he did? Or is it really in fact al Shem Sofo? So to understand this, I'd like to say a very, very simple thought. There was a great debate among secular philosophers who tried to reduce all ethics to single principles. So the debate goes like this. There were some ethicists who were called consequentialists. They believed that the test of whether an act is moral or immoral is what are the consequences of the act. If I do X, what will result? What will come out of it? What harm? What benefit? That's really the test of morality. Their opponents, who were the deontologists, held that there are certain things that are intrinsically immoral, and there are certain things that are intrinsically moral. The things that are moral should be done, even if chas v'shalom there'll be negative consequences. And the things that are immoral should not be done, even if they could have possibly good consequences. The consequentialists held no. That it all depends. If the act has good consequences, it's moral. If the act has bad consequences, it's immoral. The most famous branch of the consequentialist school were called utilitarians. And the utilitarians held that a person should always act in a manner which maximizes the greatest pleasure for the greatest number. Because if I can do something which will bring happiness, satisfaction, contentment to the greatest number of people, that is what I should do at any given time. And this was a very, very popular philosophy, but it was greatly critiqued. And other philosophers' opponents thought of certain scenarios where the application of utilitarianism leads to an absurdity. And one of the classic examples is the following case. Imagine you have 6 people in a room. 5 of the people are dying of terrible illnesses. The first needs a heart transplant. The second needs a lung transplant. The third needs a liver transplant. and the remaining 2 need kidney transplants. So without the transplants, these 5 are going to die. And there's one person in the room who's perfectly healthy. His heart is fine, and his lungs are fine, his liver is, his kidneys are fine. So what is the moral thing to do? If you do nothing, the 5 will die and 1 will live. So in theory, the application of utilitarianism should provide that we should chop up the 1, distribute his organs, and save the 5. So this is one of the counter examples that philosophers invented to critique utilitarianism. It leads to an absurdity. There can't be a moral principle that you always act in a manner which brings the greatest good to the greatest number, because it would lead to the absurdity of killing a perfectly innocent person to save 5 other people. So why not? And the answer is because to kill an innocent person is wrong. It is intrinsically immoral. The fact that abiding by that moral principle of not killing an innocent person will result in the death of 5 other people is irrelevant. It's wrong. It can't be done. You can't kill an innocent person no matter what the consequences are. And I think we all intuit that that is correct. Because you're right. If there's no harm done, of course, why not benefit as many people as you can? But certainly there are certain side constraints. There are certain limits. There are certain lines you can't cross, even if crossing them would bring a tremendous te'elas to people. But you can't kill an innocent person. That really is the issue here in the Parshat Ben Sarah Rumayra. We have a situation like this, that the death of the Ben Sarah Rumayra is going to provide great benefit. Great benefit to him, and great benefit to the people who are his potential victims. Right? For him, Yom was Darchei, while Yom was Chayev. Better he should die innocent and go to Olam Haba than die Chayev and risk suffering in Olam Haba. His victims certainly will benefit. Right? He won't be malastamus abrius, he won't rob, he won't murder. So we could achieve this benefit by killing him. So the Hazmi of the Gemara was that it makes perfect sense. Even if he's totally innocent, he's a cotton, he's not a bardas, he's not of legal intelligence, he's not liable for his actions. The Hazmi of the Gemara is that it makes sense. It could be such a halacha that you'd kill a cotton for the benefit for him and for everybody else. The Gemara answers in the Maskana that it's not that way. It says if the person is an innocent person because he's a cotton now, there is no halacha that you can kill a person, a totally innocent person, to benefit others, even to benefit him. To kill an innocent person is an injustice. It is intrinsically immoral. There can't be such a halacha. And therefore the Gemara says, once I have the pasuk, ki yiyeh leish bein, that the ben is only liable if he's an ish, we understand intuitively that the reason is, as the Mishnah says, because he's not a barayishim, he's not balach la mitzvahs, he's not chayav in mitzvahs. There can't be a halacha that you kill the ben Sarah Rumayra. But if he's a gadol who is liable, now there's a different question. He committed a crime. Now we say that this crime, it's a crime, it's an outlaw. He belittled his parents, he ate like a glutton, but it's not a capital crime. Now what does it mean it's not a capital crime? So let's remind ourselves of what the Mesilas Yesharim writes. The Mesilas Yesharim writes that really, al pi strict midas hadin, the slightest aveira should be deserving of the most severe einish. You rebel against the Ribono Shel Olam? You rebel against the Ribono Shel Olam? Oh no, what's the big deal? It's a small thing, a little thing. Let it be a very little thing. But it's a little offense committed against the Melech Malchei Hamlochim. So the Mesilas Yesharim says that really the slightest Aveira should be deserving of the most severe Einish. So why not? That's Midas HaRachamim. One of the provisions of Midas HaRachamim, of mercy, is that Hashem has Rachmanos. We've pointed out many times, this is what we say in davening every night. We'll say it in Arab in a little bit if you haven't davened yet. V'hu Rachum, Hashem is merciful. Yechaper Avon, He atones for sin. V'lo Yashchis, and He does not destroy even those that are unpenitent. In other words, where we do tshuva, Hashem atones. And when we don't do tshuva, Hashem isn't going to atone, but v'lo Yashchis, He's not going to destroy. That's Midas HaRachamim. That's a function of Midas HaRachamim. So when you think about it for a second, it's an amazing thing. Look, in the Torah we have a hierarchy of Einshim. We have Einshim that are a Chi of Malchus. We have Einshim that are a Chi of Mispedei Shemayim. Einshim that are a Chi of Karas. Einshim that are a Chi of Misas Bezin. We have 4 levels of Misas Bezin. Sayif is the most lenient, Skila is the most chamor. That whole hierarchy of punishments is a consequence of Midas HaRachamim. Because of Midas HaRachamim, so certain Aveiros you get off with a lesser Einish, certain Aveiros bigger Einish, certain Aveiros an even bigger Einish. But in theory, Al Pi Midas Hadin, the smallest Aveira should have been deserving of the most severe Einish to the point of total annihilation. So when we say that the Ben Saru Umayr is Nidin Al Shem Sofo, so at first glance it sounds like a tremendous cruelty, Achzarius. No. It is the strict Midas Hadin. Hashem applies the strict Midas Hadin. And we might have said that in our way of looking at things, belittling your parents or eating like a glutton is not the most severe Aveira, but Al Pi, the strict Midas Hadin, it certainly is deserving of Skila, it's even deserving worse. It's really deserving utter, total annihilation. The person should go up in a puff of smoke. But Skila is the most severe punishment that can be applied. So he's deserving of the Al Pi Midas Hadin. Why don't we have Rachamim? The consideration of Al Shem Sofo is that we're not going to be merciful on him if the result is an achzarius, a cruelty to others. And more than that, we're not going to be merciful on him in the short run if it is an achzarius to him in the long run. So the consideration of Yom Zakar or Yom Chayim, let him die innocent, not die guilty, really means this. He's really deserving for what he did of the most severe Einish. He's certainly deserving Skila. But we should have Rachmanos. The Torah should have pity on him. The Torah doesn't have pity because Fakir. This is the real mercy. This is the real Rachmanos. That Yom Zakar or Yom Chayim. But even without that, we're not going to have pity on him if that's an Achzarius, that's a cruelty against his potential victims. So really, the Nidin Al Shem Sofo is not why he's punished. He's punished for what he did. The Ben Saru Umayr is punished for what he did. And that's why he has to be a Godel. If he's not a Godel, he's not a Barayshim. That's why we have to have an Ashara. We have to have a pasuk which tells me not to be a Ben Saru Umayr. L'seichlu aladam. That's why, as the Ramban says, exactly what the Aveira is. He was over Kadeshim Tiyu, he belittled his parents. That's why Mechila helps. Because if the parents are Moichel, it undoes the crime. He's punished for what he did. But there should have been Rachamim, there should have been mercy. So we say, no, that there's no room for mercy over here because we look into the future that having mercy on him would have negative consequences both for him and for others, and therefore we apply the strict din. I just want to point out that this can answer the Mizrachi's question. Mizrachi's question is that a murderer we give sayif, which is most lenient to Av Misas Bezdin, and the Ben Sarah who we suspect will be a murderer, we give skila, the most chomer. Where's the common sense? And the answer is very simple. That the murderer is within that system of Midas Harachamim. In other words, in that hierarchy which the Torah has set up, Al Pi Midas Harachamim, the more severe crimes have more severe punishments, a murderer is also in that system. So in the hierarchy of the Torah, Chilul Shabbos and the Zara are chiyuvim of skila, and the Retzicha is a chiyuv of sayif, which, by the way, is very instructive as to what the Torah considers more important. Whereas Chilul Shabbos, in a sense, is worse than murder. Avodah Zarah is certainly worse than murder. So those are skila, this is sayif. But that distinction is a distinction al pi midas harachamim. But a Ben Sarah where there's no application of rachamim, so that's why. What punishment do we give him? The most severe punishment that a person can get, which is skila. Right? That's the Nakuda Ben Sarah is, the Torah is telling me that there are situations which remove the potential for rachamim. There can't be rachamim if ultimately it's an avzorius. And this is something, by the way, which is a very valuable lesson for us to learn. Because sometimes we have pity, but the pity really is a disservice to the person in the long run. The rachamim really is an act of avzorius. We have to know that in that case, that's not an application of pity. Here, that's the idea of the Ben Sarah. We don't apply mercy to him. He's punished for what he did, but with the full force of Midas Adin. Why? Because any application of mercy would be counterproductive, and therefore we give him the worst einish possible, which is skila. I want to point out another ha'ara of Ben Sarah Umar. We have a few minutes. I think this is something that not necessarily related to what we've said, but nevertheless important. We've explained that the Nidin al Shem Sofo, the looking ahead into the future, really is not the root of the Einish. It's the reason why we don't apply Rachamim, why we don't apply mercy. We punish him for what he did. But what really is the Avlos? The Ramban said he belittled his parents, he ate like a glutton. There's another aspect over here to this. Chazal say that there's a smichas of parshias. There's a juxtaposition of parshias. The parsha of Ben Sarah Umayra follows the parsha of Yafas Torah. And the person marries this captive woman, so he's going to have a Ben Sarah Umayra. The Gemara in Sanhedrin Kuf Zayin tells a story like this, that when David HaMelech was running away from Avshalom, so one of David's supporters, Hushai Ha'arki, came to David. And at that time, it says in the Gemara a very surprising thing. It says that Bikesh David Lavid Avodah Zarah. David HaMelech wanted to commit Avodah Zarah. He wanted to practice Avodah Zarah. So Hushai Ha'arki came to him and said, Melech Shekamaischa, a king like you, is going to commit Avodah Zarah? How can you commit Avodah Zarah? Now the Mefarshim explained that David HaMelech really didn't want to commit Avodah Zarah. David HaMelech wanted to avoid the Chilul Hashem. Because he was the king of Yisrael, and he'd be deposed and perhaps even killed by his son, with tremendous Chilul Hashem. So he wanted to act in a manner which would justify his being killed. So he was going to make as if he did Avodah Zarah, so people would say, he had it coming to him, because he became an idolater. So Bikesh David Avodah Zarah. So Hushai Ha'arki said, a king like you is going to do Avodah Zarah. So David HaMelech answered, so what is better? That a king like me should be killed by his son? Like that's a better alternative? So Hushai Ha'arki said to him, why didn't you darshan smuchim? Why didn't you darshan the juxtaposition of the psukim? You should have known this would happen. Because Avshalom's mother was a Yafas Torah, And because you married her, that's why Avshalom turned out as he did. And you should have known that. So the Maharal is troubled by the obvious question. Because we're having a discussion of what the more reasonable strategy is. Should David appear to be Eved of Avodah Zarah to avoid a Chilul Hashem? Or should David not be Eved of Avodah Zarah and allow himself to be killed by Avshalom, which also could be a Chilul Hashem? Right? And the Chushi Argi says, why did you dash the Smuchim? You shouldn't have gotten into this mess in the first place. How did that address the question? So the Maharal says that what Chushi Argi was saying like this. He was saying it won't be a Chilul Hashem. He says no one is going to think that your death was unjustified, even if you don't do Avodah Zarah. People will say, you know why he died? He married a Fastayar, and he had a Ben Saru Moira, and that's why he got killed. So it's not going to be a Chilul Hashem. Yeah, if a Melech Yisrael would be killed, and there's no explanation for it, that's a Chilul Hashem. Like, why did the Kodesh Baruch Hu do something about it? But there's a perfectly reasonable explanation over here. Right? You marry a Fastayar, you have a Ben Saru Moira, what do you expect to happen? Of course, they want to kill you. He says, what's the Nukuda? Avshalom wasn't a technical Ben Saru Moira. We don't find he ate meat, we don't find he drank wine. The pashtus is that he was older than the Ben Saru Moira can be lahalacha. When the Gemara means that he is the concept of a Ben Saru Moira, the idea of a Ben Saru Moira. But what does he really have in common with the Ben Saru Moira? The Ben Saru Moira's crime, the Ramban says, is a crime of self-indulgence. Avshalom, this is a political rebellion. Now, I think there's a Nakud we have to understand over here. Why is it that if you marry a Fastayar, you have a Ben Saru Moira? Why does it follow? Now, the Alshach is Medayik. It's not because the child takes after the mother. That's not the point. If you look in the Chumash carefully, the Chumash clearly lays the blame at the father's doorstep. If a man has a Ben Saru Moira, it's not that if a man marries a Fastayar, the child takes after the mother as a Ben Saru Moira. It's because the father married a Fastayar, right? Therefore, the child Ben Saru Moira. What's the connection? I think that there's a totally different question over here. Every person needs two things. It's really related to last week's parsha, but I won't go into that. Shlomo Melech says in Mishlei that there is what is called Chachma and there's what is called Musar. Ladas Chachma and Musar. Chachma is moral knowledge. To know right from wrong, that's Chachma. Musar is restraint, is self-control, is discipline. If you want to be a good person, it's not enough to have Chachma. Because I can give you moral instruction for the next 30 years, and you'll know exactly what is right and what is wrong, and nevertheless, it won't be realized in your lifestyle if you lack musar, if you lack restraint, if you lack discipline, if you lack self-control. Because you follow an impulse, because it seems good, it feels good, you do it, right? That's a tremendous sakon. You have to have chachma, you have to have musar. The Torah is matter to your Fastayar. You're allowed to marry a captive woman. But Chazal say, why did the Torah permit it? Really, it's something the Torah shouldn't have permitted, marrying a Gentile woman without a proper conversion. The Torah permitted it because Lo dibra Torah ela keneged Yetzer Hara. The Torah addressed the Yetzer Hara. This was a situation where the Torah foresaw the person would not be able to withstand the temptation. So the Torah had to relent. But what it really means is that the person gave in to a Yetzer Hara which he shouldn't have given into. He followed an impulse. He lacked musar, he lacked the discipline, he lacked the control, he lacked the restraint. So when something appealed to him, he could not resist, he could not control himself, he could not hold himself back. it's a moral failing, even though it's permitted. The Torah permitted it. But since the Torah only permitted it because the Torah couldn't forbid it, because you'd be over anyway, it is a moral failing. You succumb. You succumb to a temptation you shouldn't have succumbed to. That's interesting. The Gemara says, so we mentioned Tanchuma, that if you marry a fast tire, you'll ultimately come to hate her. There's also juxtaposition, because after the parsha of fast tire, it says, if a person has two wives, achas ahula ve'achas snua, one is beloved, one is despised. So the juxtaposition teaches me, you marry a fast tire, you'll hate her. Why does it follow? Why does that follow? If you marry a fast tire, you'll hate her? The idea is this, because who do we love? We love the people that make us feel good about ourselves. It says if you marry someone that every time you think about her, you realize that my marriage to her is a consequence of a moral failing, of course I'll hate her. When you get up in the morning, you look at her, right? And what do you see? Why am I married to this woman? Why is she here in my house? Right? Because I failed morally? So of course you're going to hate her. You don't need any terutzim to explain why you hate her. That goes without saying. But that is what the idea of the Yafas Tayar is. If that's what your life is, what type of children do you expect to have? What is the example that you provide for your children? An example of a person who, if he wants something, goes for it. And the truth is that the Ben Sarul Naira, therefore, is a natural consequence of the father who married the Yafas Tayar. He's a chip off the old block, so to speak. And I'll point out, that really is the symbolism of meat and wine. In other words, the Ben Sarul Naira is chayav for eating meat and drinking wine. Okay, meat and wine is geschmack. You don't need an explanation to explain why it's meat and wine. But meat and wine is more than geschmack. Meat, as we know, is the food that creates desire. You may remember, we talked about this many years ago, Parshas Bahalaischa, when the Bnei Yisrael, hisavu ta'ava, they wanted desire. Remember, they were eating mun, and the mun, because it was ruchni, because it was spiritual, it diminished their desire for food. So therefore they had no pleasure in eating, because you only have pleasure when you have an appetite. If you have no desire, no appetite, you have no pleasure. So hisavu ta'ava, they wanted desire. So how do you build desire? They said, Mi yachilenu basar, who will give us meat to eat? So the Meshech Chacham explained, because since meat comes from an animal which has desire, plants don't have desire, but animals have desire. So you are what you eat. You eat meat. It creates desire. What does wine do? Wine removes restraint. That needs no explanation. So if your diet is meat and wine, right, that's an explosive combination. In other words, meat builds desire, wine removes restraint. That's exactly what the child of the Yafas Tayar is. The fact that Avshalom was not technically a Ben Sarul Naira is irrelevant. He is the Inyan of Ben Sarul Naira. He had a desire for power. If it meant killing his father, if it meant overthrowing his father, that was irrelevant. If he wanted it, he goes for it. That's the idea of the... So I just want to say one ha'ara. The Gemara says that really the Ben Sarul Naira, the Parsha Ben Sarul Naira can never really happen. There's so many technicalities that can't be realized in practice. So why did I write the Parsha? Rosh v'kabel schar. It says learn the Parsha and you'll receive reward for learning it. What does that mean, Rosh v'kabel schar? There's enough of the rest of the Torah to learn? Because it means that there are limudim, there are lessons to learn from this Parsha. So even though there's no practical application, too many conditions that can't be met, but there are practical, real lessons to learn from this Parsha. What is the lesson we're meant to learn from this Parsha? So there are many limudim. But Rabbeinu Bechaya brings from the Rashba that the lesson of this parsha, the lesson, he holds is the central lesson, is an amazing lesson, which is that we see from here that parents have to overcome the natural desire, the natural love they have for their children to do the right thing. Right? You have a child, he's your child, for better or for worse, he's your child. You love him, you care for him, you want him to thrive. And here we have a situation where, for all the considerations of the Avera that he did, and Al Shem Sofo, you have to overcome that natural love for him, bring him to Bezin to be executed. He says, you have to overcome your natural impulse. That's what the Torah is telling me. A father, a parent, has to be ready to suppress the natural love you have for children to do what is the Ratzon Hashem. And in this instance, what ultimately is best for the child as well. He says that really the lesson of the Ben Sarah Umayra is really the same thing as the Akedah. He writes that Avraham Avinu performed the Akedah, was willing to sacrifice Yitzchak to do the Ratzon Hashem, to overcome the natural love for a child. Says the Parsha Ben Sarah Umayra is really the Akedah. That means what the Torah calls upon a parent to do in the Parsha Ben Sarah Umayra is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu called on Avraham Avinu to do by the Akedah. Now we all understand that the Akedah was something that was extraordinary. That's why it's the great schus that stands for Klal Yisrael for eternity. So I want to point out like this. There's a discussion in Achronim. What is the right thing for the parents to do? Okay, we learned that the parents have the option of being Michael. Should they be Michael? Should they not be Michael? You're right. If they're Michael, then he's off the hook. Because the whole chet was that he belittled his parents. The parents are Michael, he's off the hook. But should the parents be Michael? So Achronim discussed this question. I have a very, very beautiful sefer. It was written on the halachas of Ben Sarah Umayra, Talmud Chacham in Eretz Yisrael, a massive sefer. And he goes through many opinions in this question. And he brings Rabbeinu Bechai, and he says the Pashas of Rabbeinu Bechai is saying that the commendable thing is not to be Michael. Right? Rabbeinu Bechai compares the parents who are not Michael to Avraham Avinu at the Akedah. So the right thing is not to be Michael. So the question is this. The question is, so why does the Torah give them the right to be Michael? If the right thing is not to be Michael, so let the Torah not give them the right to be Michael. Take the decision out of their hands. So why give them the right to be Michael and say, but really you shouldn't be Michael. Really the right thing is to carry out the parsha. If the right thing is to carry out the parsha, so the answer is the exact same thing. Just like in the parsha of Yefas Tayar, what did the Torah tell us? The Torah told us that there are certain things that the Torah says, really you shouldn't do them. But the Torah understands its audience and says, listen, we can't expect this of people. So there are situations that something which the Torah should have forbidden, the Torah will permit. But it has consequences. You have a Ben Sarah Umayra. We're talking to those same people. The same people that gave in to that temptation, who followed the path of least resistance, who followed the natural impulse. And because the Torah couldn't expect more. So now of those same people, the Torah is going to expect the same thing? No, now you have to overcome the most natural impulse of love for your children and bring your children to be executed. The Torah says no. The Torah knows who it's speaking to. If the parents of the Ben Sarah Umayra are the man and woman who married in the Parsha of Yefas Tayar, they're the same people that don't have that strength of character. So the Torah says, I can't insist that you carry out this parsha. Of course it's the right thing to carry out this parsha. It's the right thing for the potential victims. It's the right thing for the child himself. But if you are that person, you are the children, or the parents I should say, of this Ben Sarah Umayra, there's a history behind this. You're those people who married the Yefas Tayar. So what can I expect of you? I can expect you all of a sudden you're going to turn over a new leaf and be such a person that has the discipline and self-control to do the right thing contrary to the natural inclination of a human being. It's the same person. The same parents who married each other, the Gefas Tayar, these are the parents the Torah says it's true. The right thing is to carry out the sentence, but in this instance I can't insist on it. And therefore you have the power to be Michael. But the real chesed, the real rachmanos, is to overcome the natural impulse, carry out the parsha. It's good for the child, it's good for the community.